Hi, this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Wherever you find us, whether it's a video or podcast on your favorite platform, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. You can also find us on major social media platforms. If you go to miamighostchronicles.com, you can find links to the videos or MP3 files, which you can download and enjoy without commercial interruptions. If you're into classic horror, ghost, and adventure stories, I narrate Nightshade Diary, and you can find links at nightshadediary.com. If scary stories are your bag, and listening to encounters with cryptids, ghosts, dogmen, and other weird creatures sends a shiver up your spine, then go to supernaturalstorytime.com for links to our weekly podcasts. Noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird can be found at eerie.news or visit the Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at miamighostchronicles.com. Please subscribe to my newsletter on Substack. Just go to mppelliser.com for a link. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. So how's everybody doing? Good? Everything is good here. Today, I decided I want to do something a little bit different. Instead of doing the Progressive Insurance weather thing, like give you a dew point update, or talking about the pigeons, the chickens, the guineas, which, by the way, I have to mention, I got like about 15 eggs out of a burn pile that was 10 feet in the air because this guinea of all places, that's decides to lay the eggs, and they're just hatching now as we speak. That's why I'm a little bit flustered because I'm trying to like look at something in an incubator and all that stuff. So, but anyway, let's. I'm going. I decided, you know what? Let's do something different. I said, you know what? There's so much weird stuff out there that I said, why don't I see if I can find something interesting to look at? And I said, sure enough, here it is. Okay, this is the story of Animalian. All right. And basically, it's saying mutilated farm animals, most likely victims of UFO experiments. And anybody that's seen any of the shows that I've had, some of them having to do with UFOs, or some that specifically talk about, these cattle mutilations, are they like, there was a horse, this was back in the 60s out in Colorado. They were saying, no, the poor animal got struck by lightning, except there was a bunch of stuff that didn't correspond with an animal struck by lightning. But anyway, this is what this article says. Several waves of cattle mutilation were reported recently. A mysterious predator, oh boy, opened animal carcasses, cutting out their internal organs. The predator was unstoppable, and dead cattle were found even in zoos. The most mutilations occurred in 1975 into 1976, the worst of them found in the U.S. There were thousands of victims. In Colorado alone, 3 cows on average were mutilated on a daily basis. Governor Richard Lamb then stated that the mutilations were, quote, one of the greatest outrages in the history of Western cattle industry, end quote. Once buffaloes were mutilated in Cheyenne Mountain, that at the time hosted a U.S. Air Force defense station. The predators were not stopped by thousands of soldiers patrolling the area. Bloodless animal carcasses remained a challenge that the American could not stand up to. In 2009, cattle mutilations came back. On March 8th, a dead cow was found near the Purgatoire River by Mike Duran, a cattle rancher. She's an older cow, so I thought she may have died. I spotted her near the Purgatoire River bottom and went and looked at her. She was on her side and it looked a little odd. When I took a closer look, I saw that her udders had been removed, Duran said. It appeared as if the udders were cut off with a laser. There was no blood on or around the carcass, and the incisions were perfectly round. 2 weeks later, Jim Guerin, a rancher from Walsenburg, Colorado, also found a dead cow with its udders cut off. We searched and searched, and we could not find blood on the ground or on the cow. I just can't understand how anyone could surgically remove a part from an animal and not spill some blood, he said. Absence of blood is one of the characteristics of an invisible forces attack. After opening carcasses, veterinarians found out that there is not a single drop of blood in them. It is very difficult to bleed out an animal because when arteries are cut open, veins close and hold the blood back. The blood can be removed by pumping salt solution through arteries, but it's difficult to do in a field. It is the strangest thing I've ever seen. I cut the hide and the legs just fell off. All the bones were broken, Miller said. This happens when a mutilated animal is thrown down from above. There were a number of cases when ranchers found carcasses in the trees, hanging off power lines, or other places where a cow cannot get on its own. Traces of animals in the snow or mud would suddenly disappear as if the animal were lifted in the air. Coyotes and vultures would not touch the carcasses. Miller said about 10 years ago he found another one of his cows mutilated. That cow had its ears, tongues, eyes, and reproductive organs removed. I really don't know what it is. I think maybe it was a UFO. According to the circumstances, that's what it seems like, Miller said. Okay. And then it goes on. The article is not that long, and they're saying that there's other places outside of the United States that have this. And I thought it's really interesting because I had never heard that part about there being zoo animals. I had always heard the cattle thing. I had never heard that before. Okay, so anyway, my thing is this. What do you guys think? Put the comments down. I mean, this, in comparison, the 1970s, they had a lot more cattle mutilations than they do, but they still are occurring. Same thing. Animals, um, all the parts that are taken are valuable, meat wise, cattle wise, from the animal. Surgical precision, that and the fact that predators give them a wide berth. A lot of these ranches, as a matter of fact, some of them have like said, "Hey, comes with having the. I know I'm going to lose these cattle in this strange way." And sometimes what they'll do is they'll just drag it if they have to, if it's too close to where they're at, and let it disintegrate because they know that predators won't even, help them dispose of what's left there. So, put your comments what you think really is behind this, all this stuff. Like, how many? I don't know how many cattle do the aliens need to dissect. It makes you think. But if you really want an answer to that, there's an interview I did with a Dr. Rappaport that he talks something about the brains of cows that's used as far as what's the easiest or simplest way is some type of petri dish solution that can be used. It's more convoluted. I'm giving but that might be part of it. But I I think I'm about stumped as anybody else about what it could be, and I would like to hear what you guys think. And I mean, let's face it, nowadays it could be anything. Now, let's get on to the good part. The good part is who's the guest today at Stories of the Supernatural. This is her first time here. Her name is Bonnie Moore. She's a semi retired attorney, accountant, management consultant, and Golden Girls Network founder. She's a former senior consultant at a CPA firm in Washington, D.C. She developed financial processes and investigated improprieties in governmental organizations. Her self help book, How to Start a Golden Girls Home, earned widespread media coverage in 2015. An avid traveler, Bonnie has explored remote corners of the world from archaeological digs in France to a safari in South Africa. In 2017, she retired to Utah to be near family and pursue her dreams of writing, resulting in her debut novel, Buried Bones, which is a slow burn mystery wrapped in emotional complexity and carried by a deeply human cast of characters. It follows Maggie Anderson, a retired prosecutor who stumbles into the murder case of Audrey Stillman in a small Utah town. When the victim's ex husband Ben is immediately seen as the likely killer by locals, Maggie is pulled into a vigilante charged atmosphere that takes her back to her prosecutorial past and her ghosts. As she digs deeper with a small, tight knit investigative team, what unfolds is not just a whodunit, but a layered tale of justice, love, loss, and second chances. Help me welcome her. How are you doing today, Bonnie?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good.
Well, let me tell you, you I have your book. I haven't started it yet, but I was reading some of the pages, and it looks like a great novel. It looks like, and what you're drawing, I guess, off your own life experience, right? As far as the characters and things like that.
To some extent, yes. Maggie lived in D.C. and then she retired to Utah. I kind of did the
Mm-hmm.
same thing. Maggie sees ghosts though, but I haven't done that.
Okay. Okay, but you know what? That's an interesting layer. Let me, as far as it's not strictly like who done it, like a procedural kind of like a novel. But it's basically what you're saying is what that she's psychic or a medium or
Well,
something like that.
she's not quite that. She's a very intuitive person. In her career,
Okay.
was a prosecutor of sex crimes.
Okay.
Um, so that's basically she spent many years in San Francisco, and then she went to D.C.
All right.
Um, so she prosecuted sex crimes, and then she had a bad situation. One of her innocent suspects was killed by vigilantes, and she ended up retiring.
Okay.
She went to Utah, thinking she'd just get away from it. So the story starts out, and I'm not sure how far you've gotten with it, but the story starts out that she accidentally meets a guy who is being accused of murdering his ex-wife.
Right, because it sounds like this is a small town, like, it's not a big city, so everybody is knows everybody else's business, kind of like more familiar.
Absolutely, yes. It's a mountain town,
Right, exactly.
and there's an enclave of pioneer cabins, and that's
Okay.
where the victim lived. And so Maggie is drawn to this guy who says he's innocent, and the whole town is against him. They
Okay.
they really want him convicted. They're determined to convict him because he came out as gay and divorced his wife and moved to Salt Lake City. And
But
so,
they're thinking that he was the one that murdered his wife, though, or his
yes,
ex, soon
they
to be ex.
found her body buried behind one of the cabins.
Okay.
Is where it starts out. So
Okay.
she's been buried for almost 4 years, and somebody's building a new cabin, and they find the skeleton.
I get it.
Okay.
Okay.
So he's being accused because he divorced her and moved away.
He's like a motive,
Yes,
kind of.
husband is always a suspect.
Right. Let me ask you, and I don't know if it's as far as, do you look at, like as far as current, crime cases of this type, as far as to draw an idea, or how did you come up with it, as far as to put this person in this, because that character, it's like, this is a big problem. You're being accused of murder,
Right.
and in a small town where everybody, like, forget, a jury of your peers. It's like, do I really,
Exactly.
am I really gonna get that? Just forget it.
Um, well, I was taking it. I've always wanted to write, so my
Yeah.
bucket list thing that I'm doing now is writing.
Right.
And I was taking a class in how to write a murder mystery.
I see. Okay.
And
Okay.
so we all had to have a project. And so I
Yes.
came up with this location, and then I just started putting characters into the story.
Okay. And she's got a team. She's got allies. As far as your heroine, she's got people around her that are helping her out.
Yeah, it ends up being a team
Right.
that. So she's retired, so she's not officially law enforcement, but she knows law enforcement. And
Right.
then
Right.
she
Right.
brings three of her friends in, and then they actually solve the mystery.
Okay. Exactly. Right. So, but it's not like lonesome. She's out there like, okay, I've got people that, that help her out,
Oh yeah,
um,
mhm,
to solve the mystery. That's really
exactly.
great. And God knows, because, and the reason why I ask is that nowadays there's, I don't know, because of, now the thing with DNA, they're solving so many of these really cold cases that you thought they're never going to figure this out. All right.
They use DNA in this case too.
Oh, okay. There we go. I hadn't gotten there yet,
So
but
yeah, that's further in the plot. I mean,
hmm
the first thing that happens is um, Maggie wants to see the cabin where this body was found. She's
okay.
not sure if she's going to get involved. She's curious. So
hmm
she and her friend who grew up in this neighborhood in this cabin enclave, they walk down to the cabin,
Okay.
um, and that's where she sees the ghost of the victim.
Ah, okay. 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 Okay.
Okay,
Ah, all right. The plot thickens. I
yes.
like that.
So she sees the ghost, and she's really shook up. She's always been very intuitive, and she does things to feel connected to her victims, but she's never seen a ghost before.
Okay.
So she sees the ghost, and it kind of freaks her out a little bit. but
Okay.
she feels like the ghost is encouraging her to take the case.
I see. Okay.
So that's where the paranormal comes in.
So in other words, it's not just a question of defending this guy, it's finding out who really killed her.
Yes, they do solve that.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Getting back to what which I hadn't gotten there yet with the DNA, that nowadays just about every week you hear about some 30, 40, 50-year-old case,
Hmm.
cold case,
Hmm.
that sometimes not only do they find out who the perpetrator is, but they actually get to name who the remains belong to,
Hmm.
because the DNA is getting so advanced. And of course, if your family or somebody has, they kind of which direction to look at, and they can compare if there's a family member, they
Yes,
can kind of narrow it down.
they've done
Unfortunately,
some amazing things.
pardon me?
They've done some amazing things with
Oh
DNA.
no, no, yeah, I know. I look at this, and it's like 40 years ago. We for 40 years this thing is, and sometimes they have suspects, but that's it. The only, I would say, sad thing about it is that a lot of the times the perpetrator, the killer, the is dead, or they're really really old.
Hmm.
But a lot of times and sometimes they even after the fact, they end up going to prison for some other crime.
Yeah,
After they committed that, and then they end up going to prison and they pass away, and it's like, okay, justice, but not really justice. But I'm thinking, well, at least for the family,
yeah,
you get to know what happened to this person, who sometimes, for all they know, they might have just dropped out of sight. They don't have any idea what happened to them.
exactly, exactly.
Yes, I think the thing with the DNA is very it's very convincing. How's that?
Yes. In fact, in doing some research, I ended up buying a book written by the guy who first brought DNA into the law enforcement realm.
Mm-hmm.
How he ended up using it to solve a case, and that's how law enforcement started using it. But um, it's come a long ways even from that.
Sure. From what I understand, before, like, if it was like, let's say the remains were really deteriorated, or whatever proof they had, they couldn't really use it. And they've gotten so good that they can get like some DNA even from remains that are very, very old.
Oh yeah, ancient. They can get DNA off of mummies.
Right, exactly. That they're able to do the thing. But before it was like, it had to be a fresher, and little by little they've just gotten so much better
Hmm.
about getting good, and then of course it's tracking back. Like I said, sometimes they have an idea, sometimes they have no idea who the victim is, and much less who the perpetrator could be. But sometimes it helps when you know who the victim is. It's like, okay, unless, like I say, some of these crimes are stranger on stranger.
Yes.
In other words, it could have been anybody. You don't have the regular motives like love, revenge, hate, money. That you think, okay, let me look at who's around this victim.
Exactly.
It
Exactly.
was somebody that, let's say, a psychopath, just, I need to kill somebody, and the opportunity presented itself, and beyond the crime, there's no connection between us.
Uh
You
huh.
know, so yeah, I think that that's why I just about every week I look up and I read some case of finally something that's been solved.
Hmm.
Now, let me ask you, in your story, um, does she is she like an analytical person that has a hard time coming to terms that she's actually being able to see something as analytical as a ghost, or how does
She,
she feel about that?
well, she's very analytical. She's an attorney who investigates and solves crimes.
Mm-hmm.
She's also very she's intuitive. She's empathetic. One of the things that she developed when she was um, prosecuting people is she would always try to find something that belonged to the victim,
Okay.
something that she could touch and she could feel the vibes or the whatever she could connect
Mm-hmm.
with the victim, and she would carry this around in her pocket when she was working on the case like a talisman.
Like I say, yeah, psychometry and a way of talisman. Exactly. Okay.
And she would sometimes talk to whatever it is, just talk like she was talking to the victim, and she does this in the story.
Okay.
Um, the victim, the woman who was killed, had a herb business. She sold herbs and crafts and things at a small store, and
Okay.
she would make sachets out of lavender.
Mm-hmm.
And Maggie ends up just accidentally going into that store, and she finds the last item left in the store that came from the victim, and she buys it. So
Okay.
she ends up with this lavender sachet that she keeps in her pocket. And
Okay.
so it later on in the story, she's carrying it in her pocket, and they're interviewing people that are suspects, and she puts her hand around it, and she kind of silently talks to the victim and says, asks, what do I need to know about this? And
Right.
it becomes she uses it as a way of connecting with the victim, and trying to understand what happened in the victim's life.
So let me ask you, in this case, she's out, well, she was a prosecutor, but she's not acting in an attorney capacity. So is the guy's defense lawyer, is he help working with her, or what do they?
Well, she actually ends up being hired by the defense
Oh, okay. Okay.
as
Okay.
the investigator. So
Okay.
they don't have enough evidence. He sends her out to get more evidence, to try to figure out what happened. So she's the protagonist. The defense
Right.
attorney is kind of in the background,
Right. Right.
um, and she reports to him and tells him what's going on, and he gives her some directions sometimes. But she's the protagonist, going
Okay.
around trying to get him. I mean, this is a 4-year-old murder that she's trying to solve.
Exactly.
So, um, she's interviewing people. She's actually spending time up in the little mountain town, and
Right.
because she lives in Salt Lake City.
Okay.
All four of the people on the team live in Salt Lake City, but they go up there and work on this case. And she works closely with the DA. Now the DA is a very conflicted person, because he's getting a whole lot of pressure from the town to convict the guy.
Right.
Or if you can't convict him, just make it a cold case and make it go away. And she doesn't want it to be a cold case either. She wants
So what is this? Is this like a little town that has little or no crime? Is that what it is? That these people are
it,
not used to that?
yeah, 5,000 people in the whole county.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
That's pretty sparse. Yep.
yeah. Um, and they they just haven't accepted the fact that a person who is gay is just part of society. They're really against him for that fact, and they want him convicted because of that.
Let me ask
It's
you then,
all based on prejudice.
when she disappeared, right, that all of a sudden she's not there, what did everybody think had happened to her? That she had left, or what, or did they always suspect somebody had killed her?
Um, someone the actually someone who was involved in the murder actually spread the rumor that she had left town,
I see. Okay. Okay.
and so nobody paid much attention.
Right, right. Nobody, oh, she left and that was the end of that. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Not like,
And
oh, what happened to so and so? You know,
she left.
exactly.
Yeah. So um, so nobody's paying too much attention until they dig up the body.
Okay. And when they, which obviously, and I'm thinking to myself, well, if they dug up the body, I guess it must have been like going, oh shit, I'm in trouble now.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, like, let me ask you, how's this? The defense lawyer, do you think if if he wouldn't have had your protagonist help, do you think that he would have been able to defend this guy or
No.
no? No,
Mm-mm.
right? Okay.
No.
Okay.
She uses intuition and female ways of doing things.
Okay.
She's friendly with the right people. She uh, pulls information out from various. She ends up with four suspects, and then she
Okay.
has to figure out which one it is.
Okay. So, but at some point, let me ask you something. Why is she's so convinced that it's not her ex-husband?
There's no evidence against him.
Okay.
You know, they can't come up with any evidence. They try.
Okay.
They try to make mountains out of molehills.
Mm-hmm.
No evidence. And he moved away several months before she was killed.
Okay.
But the DA says, well, he could have come back and done it.
Well, right. Yeah.
You know,
But at the same time, yeah, it's like that's like any. It could have been anybody.
yeah.
Exactly. That's very interesting. Because yeah, we always look at, you know, always you think, okay, motive. Who wants to kill this person or benefits from the death of this person. And then you work it from there. Unless I get, like I said, unless it's a stranger on stranger crime, and then there's um. So that in the and I'm gonna read the book, but I can't help myself.
I don't
Does
want to say
she
too much there.
is she are these people, because like you said, this is a really sparsely 5,000. Has there ever been any murders there that were unsolved, or was this a one-off?
I think this is really a one off in the community.
Okay.
Um, you always have, you know,
Well, you know where I'm going
usually
with this
four
was
times once
had
in a while
had
you have an unsolved murder, but it's a very unusual situation.
right. And the reason why I'm asking is like is I don't want you to give away the thing, but is this killer killed somebody else in the past, and got away with it? And
I'm not going to go there.
okay, all right, see what I mean? See where I was going? Well, and see, this is the thing. Again, you're thinking, well, maybe as far as the townspeople know, there hadn't been any other murders, but what is it? No victim, no crime. If this perpetrator killed somebody else, buried them somewhere out in the woods, and then put out a rumor, oh, so and so said he was moving to wherever. Nobody goes looking for this person, and for all you, yeah, they're pushing up daisies back in the pasture over there, and
and,
nobody
and,
knows.
and actually, what happens in this process is they actually uncover a very significant scandal in the town.
Oh, of course.
So we have to have that too.
Yes. Okay.
Um, and then, of course, Maggie and her sidekick, if you will,
Right.
start having romantic feelings towards each other.
Okay.
So that's um, a subplot.
Okay.
Makes it
Okay.
interesting.
So in the middle of this, she's okay. Oh, nothing wrong with that. Romance. Who done
So
it?
um,
And let me ask you, is the reason, how's this? Is the reason that she's seeing the ghost of this victim, is it because the girl is wants to help her, or she just wants resolution, or she's trying to, in other words, I want to make sure the right person is the one that, in other words, at the end of everything, does this ghost say, okay, I'm done, I'm out of here?
I think the ghost wants. Um, no, let me say it this way. I think Maggie wants justice for the victim.
Okay.
The ghost wants justice for herself. She,
Okay.
she was a victim in more ways than one. Um,
Okay.
and in fact, I'll give you this little tidbit. When
Okay.
they did the autopsy, they discovered that she was 3.5 months pregnant when she was killed.
Oh boy, talk about motive, motive, more motive.
That's right.
Motive. Yo, yes.
So we have a pregnant corpse.
Right.
Can't be the husband because he was long gone. He was
Right.
gone. So who
Right.
is?
Exactly. But yeah, but of course that puts a whole new, It wouldn't be the first time that a woman gets murdered because she's, inopportunely pregnant. It's like, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, that happens. That happens. That's happened quite a lot. So, yeah. So yeah, talk about motive for because I imagine that's why everybody thinks, well, who would want? And let me ask you, are there any other suspects along the way, or is just everybody looking at him? There was nobody that she was having problems with, or
Everybody loved her. The town was
okay,
convinced that, I mean, she was a real sweet girl. Grew up in town. Everybody loved her. She had this herbal business, and she sold these teas, and they couldn't find anyone who didn't like her
so somebody out there is a real good hypocrite or a real good actor, as far as
or took advantage of her.
right. But I mean, you had to fake it. How's that? Yeah, you know how to fake it. Because the
Yeah.
last thing you want is for your neighbors or your townspeople to realize I want to beat up this lady and then she turns up dead. So if you've got those plans going on, you're always like, oh, she's such a sweet lady or she's such a sweet girl. Mm.
But yeah, she's um, it
No,
I don't want to say too much.
no, no, then don't. I don't want to. I don't want to.
All I can say is we end up with four suspects.
Okay. Now let me ask you: Are you going to? Is this going to be the first of a series? Are you going to keep going with? Okay.
I'm working on the second one now.
Oh, okay. And are you going to stay in the same setting, or are you going to move some other place in out of state or in Utah or what?
Um, it's going to be pretty much the same setting, kind of
Okay.
a different situation. Um, what I'm, what I want, what Maggie is going to do is she's going to end up defending people who run into complications with the law.
Okay.
Most murder mysteries are, a cop trying to catch somebody who kills somebody. You
Right.
know, that's your traditional murder mystery.
Right.
And so you're always chasing and looking for the murderer. And in this
Exactly.
case, we've got someone who's run into a situation with the law, and he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know how to. He's never dealt with the law before,
Sure.
and he says, "I'm innocent. I don't know what to do." And she says, "You've got to have some help. Let me help you." And
Okay.
she kind of puts herself into these situations where somebody fairly innocent has gotten into trouble or
Okay.
has a bad situation, and she goes in there and um, helps them get through whatever the situation is.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, because most people, when it comes, especially depending on the type of crime or something that they're involved in, it can be complicated. Like I'm out of my depth totally.
Yeah,
So,
like the second novel is dealing with someone who kills in self defense. So,
okay.
she's working with a situation where there is a self defense, and that's always difficult in court.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but she takes the side of the defense. She's on the defense. She's always going to be on the defense team now,
Okay.
which is also unusual. So you have a woman on the defense team where 99% of all crime stories, your protagonist is on the prosecution side.
Right. Right.
So
Exactly.
it's a little bit different.
Yes. Yes. Except the old Perry Mason shows. Which, by the way, every once in a while I catch some of those and I was like,
Yeah.
you know. Um, the and this is there a point where how's this? Does she go on her intuition to believe that this person is innocent or needs help? Or is there any ever time that she's like wonders, am I doing the right thing about this? What if I'm wrong? What if I'm helping the wrong person?
Um,
Not the wrong person, but helping them thinking something about them and that's not really who they are.
she trusts her intuition a lot.
Okay.
Um, defense attorneys usually don't worry about that particular question.
It's just forget it. You're I'm gonna tell you, I see what you mean. I'm getting to
You know,
like
defense attorneys say, I'm going to do the best to get you the best outcome, period.
right,
You know,
right,
and they always have to look at whether or not, you know, if there's enough evidence to convict somebody in court, then what you do is you negotiate a deal.
right.
And
As far
you know, you try to get probation or something.
right, right, yeah, yeah, exactly. I guess depending on the crime and
Mhm.
well, if you admit, whatever, then you don't. I imagine not going to. What is it? The ultimate would be that you go to a jury trial, right? That it's like the whole full blown thing,
Mhm.
unless they make a deal and they say, okay, well, all right, I'll admit I did it, but for whatever the
Well,
charge might
you
be.
take lesser charges.
Right, you take lesser charges. You take
Yeah,
something that's not
yeah,
as bad as what you're originally going to get.
yeah. I mean, I was never a defense attorney, but I learned all of this in law school.
Okay, all right, yeah, well, yeah, that's the kind of thing that sometimes I'm going by the Hollywood version, and I don't know if you're familiar. There's this movie. It's already it's got to be at least over 20 years old with Richard Gere, and he plays this hotshot defense lawyer who always wins, and it's a young guy. I can't remember. Edward Norton is the actor, and he's accused of killing this archbishop,
Oh.
or a bishop or somebody very high up, and of course the prosecution, it's the outrage, and he killed this bishop. Blah, blah,
Hmm.
blah. So basically, the guy that's being accused, something along what you said, self-defense, and he's got one of these kids that he was a runaway as a young guy. He's still a young guy. He has got a bad stutter, and his thing was, I've got split personality.
Uh-huh.
You know, I'm the stuttering fool, and then the other personality took over, and it's that personality that killed the bishop. Okay, and basically he does the whole movie to prove, this guy's, insanity. Like he's not in his right mind. He's got split personality. He was abused, all this thing, and he even proves that there was some type of that the bishop, that there was some type where he was making him film himself sexually with another young girl, one of those deals. But at the end, yeah, he gets the guy off in the sense of he's not. Then it turns out that once that's over, the guy he defended in the jail cell turns around and starts talking to him. He goes, "No, there's no other guy with a stutter. This is me. The real me was the bad self, that supposedly had done the murder, the split personality. There was no split." And he just like laughs at him and tells him, "Yeah, you fell for that thing, and that guy doesn't exist. This is me. This is really me." So
And there's no double jeopardy.
exactly, that was exactly it. There was no double jeopardy as far as that's it. He was off the hook. And you see Richard Gere, who this in this movie, he's all puffed up with himself, thinking, "Oh, I'm a hot shot, and I've got this guy, and it's a whole high profile case." And at the end, you see he's like, "I can't believe what I just did.
Hmm.
What did I do?"
It's a good storyline, isn't it?
It's fantastic when you look at it the first time when you don't know the twist at the end.
Uh-huh.
You're like, "Wow." And then at the end, it's like you're so full of yourself that you just didn't see all the signs that were there that maybe this guy really was a murderer, and he played you along with everybody else. So yeah, yep, one of those deals. Even though, let me ask you, and I know sometimes, I think when people are committed, when they're found guilty by reason, I guess, of insanity. I don't know what the actual verbiage is. In other words, they're not found guilty like they were in their right mind. If they're ever, let's say, they're sent to a medical or a mental hospital,
Hmm.
and if they're deemed cured, are they released or do they send them back to jail, to prison? Can you answer that? I've wondered
Well,
about that.
um, I think it always depends on the circumstances. But
Right.
I can tell you this: when I was in D.C.
Mm-hmm.
working as a consultant, one of my projects was at the at St. Elizabeth's Hospital, where the guy, Hinckley was, who attacked Reagan.
Right.
He was kept in that hospital, even though they figured out he was not really crazy. He kind of put
And
on
what
this.
was it? Because he was deemed a danger, or why?
He got off because on an insanity defense.
Right. Right.
So the speculation is, and I can't say, but the speculation is that he fabricated some of that to avoid going to prison,
Mm-hmm.
and so he was sent to a mental hospital.
Okay.
Okay, and he was kept there
Okay.
even when it was pretty obvious he was just not insane. You know,
Right. Yeah. You stand out because all the real crazies are running around, and you're not one of them.
but then they started. They gave him home visits. He started going to stay with his parents and this and that. And they
Right.
finally released him. But he was in St. Elizabeth when I was working on the project there. So
Mm-hmm.
of course, we talked about him. But
Sure.
yeah, he was released. It was after I finished the project, but he's out there now and living
Yeah, I know. That
the
was not too
rest
long
of his
ago that
life.
he was actually like he's in his 60s or something like that now, or
Yeah, he's up there. But they kept him long enough. It was almost like a jail sentence. It was a little
right.
bit nicer than a jail sentence, but they're still locked up.
Right.
They still have rules and regulations almost as bad, if not worse, than in jail. It's just
Right.
the facilities are usually nicer.
Sure. But let me ask you, and I guess and then I know with mental illness that's a very way to say that somebody's cured of something because some mental illnesses per se really can't be cured. You can treat them,
Uh huh.
but that person maybe will spend the rest of their life needing medication to, you know. But you always think, what is some psychologist or psychiatrist going to say this person is cured? In other words, they're not a danger anymore. That's what you always think of, They don't go to prison, they end up going to an asylum or some type of mental, institution. And then a couple of years down the road, the doctor or whoever's been treating him says he's good. He's okay.
And then sometimes they get released and they go out and kill somebody.
Oh, absolutely. Of course they do. I know. I shouldn't say absolutely, but a lot of times you do
Yeah.
hear that. You do hear
Mhm.
that. That they either, if they're supposed to take meds, they don't take their meds. They end up doing horrific things depending on what their diagnosis is. And one time, and I'll say this real quick, I was reading this book about Son of Sam. You know,
Yeah. Mhm.
they were in one of the books that it was like the ultimate evil. One of the author, one of the things he posits was that that Berkowitz committed some of the murders, but not all of them. It was a group of them, and that basically he was convinced, kind of like, take the fall for this, and you're going to act all crazy, with the thing with the dog barking and the demon, and it's telling me, because you're going to get sent to an insane asylum, and then they'll let you go in a couple of years. Like, go ahead, take one for the team. All
Mhm.
right. We're going to set you up to act real crazy, and you're going to say this thing with the dog and the Labrador with the hole and all that crap. They're going to not basically prosecute you and going to send you to an asylum, and then you'll be out soon.
Mhm.
And that's and that once he was going through the process, that basically because he was adopted, but his adoptive father was still alive, and that his fear was that they were going to do something to his adoptive father,
Mhm.
as far as the group that actually he committed these crimes with.
Mhm.
So it was like, because you would think, okay, well, if you're going to go to prison, you're not going to. I know that he was looked at by I don't know I want to say it's Bellevue, but anyway, he was examined by all these doctors
Mhm.
as to how, if he was crazy or whatever.
Mhm.
Ultimately, he did go to prison. He's still there, and they say that he's never really said anything beyond sometimes making a vague thing about somebody else because of the fear of retribution against his family.
Mhm.
That kind of deal. But I guess he believed that thing of like, nah, once they think you're crazy and you're saying, the dog is telling you to kill people, You'll be fine. You'll be
Yeah.
fine. They'll hold you for a couple of years and then they'll let you go.
Mhm.
And then of course in that case, part of it, I was reading part of the book was that the police department was getting so much heat from the people of New York because everybody was so scared. Like, you better catch somebody, all
Yeah.
right? Like now. That they didn't want to dilute the case against this guy by saying, hey, we think there's other people. In
Mhm.
other words, we got our guy. He's a guy, the only guy, who went and shot up all these young people sitting in cars. And no, yeah, there's a bunch of other stuff here, including, I believe, the sketches that they took from different witnesses throughout the shootings that did not look like him. But they didn't want to have. It was like the police was like, no, that's our guy, that's our guy. Which of course, it's not only the police, it's I guess the prosecutors. Like they didn't want to look at the possibility that it was more than one person
Mhm.
that was involved in that. So yeah, you always hear about that. And there was one case. This was a few years back. I think the guy killed his wife, and he claimed he was sleepwalking or something like that. And I was like, "What in the world?" That's a and The other one is because I was a hypnotherapist for many years. People that say, "Well, I was hypnotized to
Uh-huh.
commit these crimes," and it's like, "Come on, hello," that doesn't work that way.
You can't do anything under hypnosis that you
Of
would.
course, that goes against your moral fiber. Of course not. Of course not. But you hear that story, like,
Mhm.
you hypnotize somebody and you convince them to go rob a bank. It's like, hello?
Now, mhm.
Yeah,
I may have to do something with hypnosis in one of my stories. That would be interesting.
yeah, well, I used to do besides the traditional hypnosis, like, smoking cessation, and it's bottom line, it's behavior modification. I did do alternative, as in past life regression and all these things, and everybody would ask me, well, does that really work? Is that for real? And I said, you know what? In some cases, whether you want to believe in reincarnation or not, it works for some people. If you want to say, okay, when you put them in regression and they see this past life, whatever it is, and it works in their mind, the result is what it is. This has nothing to do with whether reincarnation is real or not. If the outcome has results, positive results along those lines.
I used hypnosis once. It was very effective.
For what? What did you?
Test anxiety when I had to take the entrance test for law school.
Yes.
And I used hypnosis when I passed the bar exam.
What is it? Memory retention?
Nervousness, you know,
Nervousness, yes. One,
it just,
yes, yes,
you just let go of all of that and you focus on what you have to focus on.
yes,
And
exactly.
it was amazing.
Yes. One time I had this gentleman. He had been a nurse out in California. All his family, everybody. And in Florida, it was some type of program. I guess they needed nurses, I think is what it was. And he was like I want to say like an LNA, but the program was come over here, take your 2 more years, become an RN. We'll train you and you work at the hospital. And then one of those deals, like go to school in the morning,
Mhm.
you work in the afternoons in the hospital, and there you are. And it was like one of these things, I'm sure, that to attract, like I said, nurses. He had been already a nurse 15 years in California. Well, what happens to him is he, every time he was going to take a test, he got so anxious he would blank out.
Mhm.
His mind would go whoosh.
Mhm.
And this was not like somebody that you say, well, they've never done nursing. He had the practical experience,
Mhm.
but of course he had to learn, I guess, other things that registered nurses learn. I don't know. And he came to see me because of that, because he was telling me, I sold everything. I left everything behind in California, and I came over here. I've got nobody here, and if this doesn't work, I'm in trouble because I've like basically banked on this working out for me.
Mhm.
So I had to work with him. So when you say that, people don't real. I guess it wasn't just the pressure of the test; it's the pressure of everything that was riding along with it.
It it was the anxiety of I don't know what I'm doing. Why am I doing this? Yada yada yada. Because
Mm-hmm.
um, I was 45 years old when I started law school.
Oh my
Graduated
God.
was 50,
Okay.
so I was scared to death. but I decided I wanted to do it, so I did it.
That's
And
great. I think that's great, by the way. I think that's great. That's fantastic. Well, this gentleman, what I did was I did a binding, what's called a double bind on him, which is, besides the quiet as mine, is that I taught him when you pick up, because this was when you know, this was a while, not that far back, but you know, when you do the, with the number two pencil that you filled in the bubbles kind of
yeah,
deal. So we did a bind when you pick up that pencil, we're gonna tie it into your relaxed state, and your memory calms down. And that's how it worked. That's how
it
he
worked
did
for
all right.
me exactly like that.
Oh, that's not what they did? Okay, there you
Oh
go.
yeah, it works.
And it works, it works. I know it works. I know it works. Yeah, because that anxiety makes blanks your mind out. Like you could have studied for hours and hours and it just yes.
On the entrance test, it's called the LSAT.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there were only 3 questions that I wasn't sure about, and when I got my score back, the only questions I missed were those 3.
There
That
you
was
go.
it.
Yes. Yes. People don't know realize that. And there's people that, by the way, they have a history all their lives though of test taking for them
Mhm,
is very difficult
mhm,
because they might just be just an anxious person
mhm,
all the time. You know,
mhm,
they're always simmering, and then they go to, you know, super anxiety. All you know, it doesn't take much,
mhm,
and they're just bad test takers. They know the information. It's just
mhm.
that when it comes to testing, that's it. It's done.
And
So
I tell people about it all the time because it worked.
yes,
Mhm,
it works. It works. Let me ask you something, Bonnie. Something about your bio that I meant to ask you about. What is the Golden Girls Network? What is that?
um, when I lived in DC,
Yes.
um, I got married.
Okay.
Not the 3rd time, but we ended up buying this big old house that needed renovation.
All
Okay.
right.
And then we spent a bunch of money fixing it up, and it was really nice.
Okay.
And then we got divorced,
Okay.
and I ended up with the house.
All
And
right.
this was 2008, and there was a big recession going on.
Yes.
And I didn't want to sell the house at that time, but I had a
Okay.
5-bedroom house. So I started taking in roommates,
Okay.
women. I
Okay.
decided it was going to be women my age group.
Okay.
And so I started doing this, and somewhere along the line, I was talking to other people, other women who were exploring the idea of roommate type situations when you're older.
Mm-hmm.
And we started talking about it. And we came up with the name of this is a Golden Girls house because the
Okay.
Golden Girls were um, very popular then. The show,
Yes.
I think they were no longer on, but it was still very fresh in people's minds. So I called it the Golden Girls Network, and I developed a software program where people
Mm-hmm.
could match up. And
Right.
I have a house. I want to be a roommate, so I was trying to do that, um, and I got a lot of publicity, but
Okay.
I couldn't make it work financially.
All
Um,
right.
and I ended up selling it to a woman in. I sold the program to a woman in Canada who's still running it. So
Really?
there is a Golden Girls Network in Canada,
Okay.
and I also wrote a book about it. It's called How to Start a Golden Girls Home, and it's been
Okay.
selling on Amazon for 10 years.
And the whole idea is the rooming or the housing for older women as far as under the same roof kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean,
That's
it similar to the show, except not, it
mm-hmm.
wasn't, it isn't always a comedy.
Right, exactly. Well,
Um,
yeah, that was that whole thing that they all got together like, okay, well, we can all live in this nice house and we all live together under the same roof. We can afford it.
yeah,
And
it
we're
makes a big difference because what what is not real well known is there are a whole lot of women out there who don't have enough money to live on, and they end up being single, and they're
mm-hmm.
too old to really work.
Sure.
And so you've got a lot of desperate old women,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
you've got a lot of women who might end up divorced at 50. And
Mm-hmm.
what do you
Sure.
do? You don't necessarily have a great job.
Right.
You've got to take care of yourself, and
Mm-hmm.
um, so um, so I wrote a book about it.
Oh, let me tell you something. If anybody, this was like you said back in '08, when of course there was
There
that
was
real
a
estate bubble and everything. But even now, look at the cost of housing and in
oh yeah,
rentals. It's
it's
like, holy, it's like, what is this? You
yeah.
know, it's like before you could like, yeah, okay, you could always find some nice little apartment or maybe a studio or something where it's all inclusive and you could like live. You could maybe, but still, it's really, really difficult.
Especially if you're a single woman.
Yeah, yeah.
I live in a 55 plus community. I love it, but they raise our rent every year.
Well, you know what? That's I know this is not the paranormal guys, but I don't care. They were talking about how everybody now is like running around like where do I live, and that they say that a lot of these 55 and over communities, people originally moved there thinking, okay, you know what, housing, the cost is low, even though you pay a monthly rental on the, let's say, a mobile home park, for example,
Mhm.
or whatever, or some place where that you have maybe some type of HOA. But now those prices, they're going up so much that what was a great idea before, as far as economy was concerned, when you went there to begin with, that's not it's not working anymore. A lot of people are having a hard time with that.
Um, I lived in San Francisco for 25 years, and they have rent control there.
Oh, they
And
do. Okay.
oh yeah, at least they did when I lived there. Um, I've been gone for quite a while.
Okay.
But California does have rent control in some areas, and
Mm-hmm.
it's an effort to try to stop that. But landlords have ways of getting around it too. They find ways of kicking out a tenant so they can raise the rent. So the
Yes,
whole
yes.
situation is very difficult.
I had a friend who lived, I think she's still living out there in Merced.
Mhm.
And I remember when I went to visit her, we went to San Francisco. This was like in '05, '06, and it was great. I went to Fisherman's Wharf and did all the touristy stuff.
Yeah.
And she told me, we were talking about, she goes, oh, there's people that buy out in Merced and commute because they can't afford to live or rent in San Francisco proper.
Mhm.
So they have to, the only way they do is coming and going. I
Yeah.
was like, wow.
Oh, there are a
And
lot of people that do that.
yes,
And
yes,
you know, the average normal person can't live in San Francisco unless
right.
you've owned your property for 30 years.
Right. And from what I understand, I was reading one time that a lot of these boxes were the old ones were the ones out of the Sears catalog from the sub box houses. And now it's like forget it, they're untouchable. But yeah, the thing with the real estate. As a matter of fact, one time I was doing research on something, and this was in Louisville, and they had what was called a millionaire's row. And one of the millionaires' older houses, it was bought over by the Presbyterian Church, and that's what they did. The ones that they were moving in there were older, unmarried Presbyterian ladies
Yes.
who lived in this house. And they ran it like that for like 15 years.
It's a good idea. You have to be careful about who you choose.
Oh, I'm
Um,
sure.
if you've spent 50 years living a certain lifestyle, it's a little bit difficult to move in with somebody who has a different lifestyle.
Sure.
But it was also educational, challenging, made some friends that I'm still in touch with.
And I know what you mean because sometimes, when I remember when I read that, I said, wow, this is a great idea. The idea was you had to be an unmarried lady, older,
Hmm.
that was in. But then I'm thinking, these houses, they got the grand staircase. There's no elevator. So, and usually all these bedrooms are upstairs, and it's like, well, I hope your knees are okay because if you're not, you've got a trip up. Which, by the way, the house, it did have a reputation for being haunted.
Oh,
And I remember that because I was reading from the original owner, the millionaire that had it built like around the turn of the century. And I said, you know what? No, as a matter of fact, the Presbyterian ladies, they were like 20 years. They were there for a while. I said, you know what? If anybody's ghost, forget the owners. It's all these ladies that lived there for 20 years. And I'm sure a bunch of them ended up passing away. If
Do
anybody's
they know it's
ghost,
a
forget the
ghost?
millionaire owner.
Mhm.
It's the old lady that some of one of these 20 some years of Presbyterian ladies living there
Uh-huh.
that that this was their last stopping place. But I guess my point is that even back then, the circumstances of being older and the economics of where are you going to live,
Mhm.
and you know, let's face it, being a Walmart greeter, you're not going to be able to cover your rent. How's that?
Yeah. You know, a lot of people are getting Social Security, but it's not enough now, and you
Mm-mm,
have to
mm-mm.
work.
Nope, it is not. It is not.
Mhm.
Even now, you could tell is like, man, this is this. There's no way. As a matter of fact, this is something I heard that a lot of these, and I'm talking Florida here, but I have a feeling that it's other places in the country that a lot of these home developers, that sometimes it takes years between the time that they buy the land, that they develop it, that they do the plumbing, the roads. That what's happened is some of them had made a plan, so we're going to develop this piece of land and we're going to put 100 houses there, whatever. But that the economy has changed so drastically between the time that they purchased the land that they planned that they're having to end up renting these houses that normally they would sell because their loan's coming due. They got to pay the bank for their
Or you
project,
can't sell.
So all of a sudden, these home developers, they become landlords
Mhm.
instead of because people aren't buying because either they decide I'm going to wait or they just can't afford it. So a lot of these developers are finding themselves having to rent out houses.
I'm not
That's
surprised.
yes,
Um, it's being a developer is a huge risk, and
yeah,
they can make a lot of money.
of course.
Um,
When you sold your house, when you sold the house, when you did the closing, this is what you were.
yeah, I ended up selling that house deci- when I decided to move to Utah, and I had 10 yard sales to get rid of all my stuff.
Oh my God. Yes, yeah, I know. See,
You know,
it's one of those things when you realize all this stuff was duplicating. We sold our house out in Miami well, really, I sold it the first day, but I sold it the weekend. My cousin, who was my real estate, she goes, Marlene, please, please let me show it during the weekend because the first offer we got was so good. She goes, because I have so many people lined up that if I tell them I'm not going to show the house, I have to give them some hope.
mhm.
Okay. So I said, okay, fine, show it for the weekend. But bottom line, we sold it within 24 hours.
Mhm.
And she goes, you have 45 days to move out. And I was like, what? She goes, yeah, I can't delay the closing beyond 45 days.
Um,
Oh my God, that's when you find you were talking about that you did all these yard sales. That it's like, how did I end up having so much crap?
well, I decided to move, and I had to do some repairs on the house before I could put it on the market. So I actually started the yard sales um, before that.
Uh-huh.
I had a room that was perfect. I set it up as a little store, and one week it was one thing. And I did it every 2 weeks,
Right.
and so um, one week was one thing. The next time it was a completely different type of thing. So I was filling it up every week and having yard sales, and I had people coming back because they knew, in 2 weeks all the kitchen stuff is going on.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Okay.
So I got rid of it, but it was just astonishing how much I had. And I knew I was going to be moving into a 2 bedroom apartment, and I couldn't bring things with me.
Plus, you were going across the country. That's another
Yes.
thing. That's another
Um,
thing. Yeah.
and I, I actually went back to the house was in Maryland, and I went back a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago,
Uh-huh.
uh, and visited the people that I sold it to.
Okay.
So I got to go back to my house.
And you were able to see it.
We sat there for 2 hours. We had a great conversation. They
Okay.
were the first people who walked in the door. They stayed for 2 hours. Now, the owner is supposed to be gone, but things kind of got messed up, and my real estate lady couldn't come, and somebody came as a substitute. He didn't know anything about the house, so I stuck around because we did a tremendous amount of remodeling. And
Okay.
so I stuck there, and so I was off in the corner describing this and this and this, and this is what we did here, and this is what we did there. And oh, let me show you this fabulous thing that I did over here. So I was showing people,
How
and
old was the house? How old is the house?
the house was built in '62. It
Okay.
wasn't that old, but it was.
Okay.
Um, it was a nice house. I
Mm-hmm.
really liked it, and the original idea is we were going to stay there, but
Right.
you know, um, and I remodeled the kitchen and did a fabulous job. And the kitchen
Yes.
is what sold the house. But I'm showing people around and telling them about this and telling them about that, and so these people came and they stayed for 2 hours talking to me, and went back, and I had the offer by that night.
I was gonna say, who needs a real estate agent? You were your own real estate
I
agent. You did,
was like, wait a minute,
you,
I
you,
paid the commission to who?
you did the pitch. You did, you did everything. It was like, man, this is great.
But we developed a friendship, and
Right.
but where I was going with this was that was in early February, and I couldn't leave until the end of April.
Okay.
And so that was part of the deal, and it worked out for them because they had kids in school, and they didn't want to be moving
So
until
it
the
was
end.
okay for the kids to finish up their
So it
school
all
year.
worked out very nicely. I stayed until the end of April, got rid of all of my stuff, packed up everything, and moved. And then they were able to spend a month painting and doing whatever
Hmm.
they did. And then when school was out, they moved in.
Yeah, it
So,
worked out. But no, for me, it was like, I mean, we knew that because it was an old farmhouse. It was about 100 years old, and it had been renovated, not by us, but from prior owners, and
uh-huh,
we knew, but it had an acreage on it, and we knew it was. And my my cousin, she goes, look, this guy, he's willing to give you 50,000. He's pre-qualified. He's going to give you a $50,000 upfront, like good faith down payment, like to take my offer.
uh-huh.
But she goes, I've got all these other real estate agents with their clients wanting to come see the house. So
Hmm.
let's show the house. But yeah, and the thing was, again, not that we had that many things. It was everything. Oh, how much? It's just surprising, like you said, that even though you think you don't have a lot of stuff, you turns out you do.
When you have a big house, you fill up the rooms, and you don't know you're doing it.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. Exactly. And plus, we were moving to a much smaller thing, like what you were saying. I knew it was that right there is like that's. I mean, I told my husband, if you tell me about moving, I'm gonna hit you with a shoe. Don't ever say moving. That word cannot come out of your mouth again. Okay?
But
He's like, no.
it it, it's nice because I used to spend every weekend. I had a huge yard,
Uh
landscaping
huh.
I had to take care of.
Yes.
Every other weekend I had a housekeeper come. We would spend a whole day, cleaning up the house. I was spending all my weekends taking care of the house and the yard. And now I don't have to do that. I don't have all this stuff to take care of anymore. I like it.
Let me tell you, I doubled over my acreage. I can't say the same. I doubled.
I have no yard to take care of
I'm
anymore.
the lawnmower lady. I'm the lawnmower lady. My husband looks
Oh,
at me and
no,
he's like, "Oh,"
no.
and it's like, but I don't mind. I do and I don't. Sometimes when it's hot like it is now, it's like, oh. But yeah, the as far as they were talking about, I'm gonna. This is a horror story, guys. It's a real estate horror story, but it's a horror story. If you're going to, I heard about this happened in here in Florida in Lauderdale by the Lakes. It's Broward County, Florida. There's a couple, an attorney, by the way.
Uh-huh.
They've owned this house like since 2000, 2001.
Hmm.
Okay. Back in 2001, they paid like around 600,000 for the house.
Okay.
I guess their kids grow up, whatever. They decide we want to keep the house, sentimental value. Plus, this is where we're going to just live our old age. But they decide, hey, this house needs to be renovated. They decide to, besides the renovation, they decide to put a second floor on the house. So much so that when they're doing these renovations, they got to move out, but they clear everything supposedly with the I think it's the city or the county, the ones that do the permits.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're going to move out temporarily, everything.
Mm-hmm.
Make a long story short, they come back, everything is fine, wonderful, except their tax bill went from 15 to $91,000. And basically it was that um that in other words the count, I think it's the city decided that because of the renovations they did, they got reassessed just like if they had bought another house.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going, what in the world? And here these poor people, they're thinking we're going to live here. You know, we have sentimental attachment to the house. Probably they brought up their family there.
Mm-hmm.
And but we want to live in comfort. Let's upgrade the house, renovate it, and we'll just stay here.
And then they got reassessed.
And then they got reassessed.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, that's a horror story. What in the that kind of thing? Like you're thinking, okay, well I'm going to retire now. Not really,
Mm-hmm.
because now you got a $91,000 tax bill
That's amazing.
to think about. Yes.
So,
Yep. 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 Yeah. You hear some of that stuff, and it's like, man, I'm not moving anywhere. I'm not doing anything because that's crazy. Like, so yeah, that is a horror story, everybody, for anybody. And I'm sure there's people out there that, as a matter of fact, when I bought this piece of property, they had on the other side of the property, they had like a small cottage, really run down. We were gonna like flatten it, and it was a rental. And the owner, she lived in Indiana, and she had like a lady, like a neighbor, that would come with the keys and show what was here. And I said, okay, everything. And then I said, at the end, I said, I was talking to the real estate lady. I said, yeah, everything. The only thing I will not close, among other things, is she's got to get that her rental. She's got to empty it out. Why? Because I knew that that guy was paying very low rent. This was 2020. I knew for a fact that he was not going to go anywhere and be able to find something like that. And it was like, no, you're sure enough, she had to come down from Indiana and in a way kind of buy him out, give him some money
mm-hmm.
to get him out of the place because he just couldn't find to
Sure.
move out.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, no, nope, nope. Marlene's not going to be the bad guy on this one. I'm not going to be evicting anybody. No. So yeah, yeah, one of those deals. That's such as modern life nowadays. It's like, I don't know, but let's go like you makes you want to like go live out in the tent or something. But Bonnie, has been absolutely wonderful to speak to you. When do you plan you're going to be releasing your second book?
Oh, I'm trying. I've cleared out a whole lot of time. I'm working on it now. It takes time. I spent 5 years writing Buried Bones, but I had to learn a
Okay.
lot about writing, and now I
Yes.
know all this stuff. It's going much faster.
Okay.
So my goal is to get it out in a year. Um,
Okay. All right.
Everybody tells me people are going to want to know when the next one is coming out. Got to get it done, so I'm doing it.
Right. Right. No, it's especially yeah when you're like I know I understand I know I understand exactly what you mean. Nobody thinks, but writing is hard work.
It is,
Mm.
and it's also fun
It's fun,
because
but when you're
I get to make up all these people. I've got all these characters that that I control their lives.
right, right, like you're developing that character, but even the fiction part, you got to think, okay, I got to make this plausible. I got to make this at the same time make sense to somebody who's reading this story. How this character got happened. Because that's what makes a good story. But yeah, I understand. Writing is hard work. For those people that think it's not, it is. It's very hard work. And there's people going, yeah, sure, sure, Marlene, sure. It's like it is. It is.
Editing makes a huge difference. I just read a book that actually was uh, won second place in a contest, and I bought it. It was a mystery, and I had a problem with it because the editing was so bad. You know,
Okay.
Now that I have had editors over and over and over again, I went through like 3 editing processes, and now I read other books, and it's like, wait a minute.
Are you using a program or do you have somebody that's actually doing the editing for you?
well, on Buried Bones, I started with a real editor.
Mm-hmm.
We went through three different processes
Right.
because the first draft is always bad.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, and then I got it back and I was getting it ready to send to a publisher, and I actually bought a program that
Okay.
found more errors.
Wow. Okay.
Um, you know, so I think a combination. You can't totally depend upon a program.
Yes.
It finds all those missing commas,
Yeah.
and
Exactly.
it finds things that you don't even think about. Or
Mm-hmm.
so I I like the idea of using both.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yes.
so anyway, I really like this editing program,
Okay.
um, and I've also learned a lot. I've read a lot of books about how to write and studied them,
Right.
and
Yes.
so now I can't read somebody's book without saying, well, let me see, how's this plot being developed?
Right. Exactly. Or what's a flow? Or
Yeah,
is the sentence sticky? Or all
yeah,
those things,
yeah.
stuff like that. Yeah.
Which sentence could be improved?
Yeah. Exactly. What's that semicolon doing there? You know. And people are going, ah, you guys, man, stop talking grammar.
But it does make a difference, and so anyway, I'm now at a completely different level of writing, and I'm doing well on the plot, and it's going to be intricate, and it's going to take some time, but I'm enjoying it because I know what I'm doing now.
Oh yeah, of course. It's like everything. It just all of a sudden. Let me ask you something, Bonnie, and I know this is off topic. Have you ever had a paranormal experience or lived in a haunted house?
I haven't lived in a haunted house. I did have an experience once where I felt like I was communicating with a spirit.
Okay.
Mhm.
What happened? Was this like at home or you went someplace and you had the experience?
um, I was at home. Uh, it was my sister was killed in a car accident.
Okay.
This is a number of years ago, and at the time she was killed, we were arguing about something.
Okay.
And 2 years later, I was living in San Francisco, and I was taking classes at San Francisco State. And I came home one night, and I was sitting on the floor doing my homework, and then I felt this spirit come out of. I had a poster on the wall, and I just felt the spirit come in and kind of take over me, and
Okay.
she took over my hand and wrote a letter to me. It was
Okay.
her handwriting saying,
Okay.
let's clear up this issue. I'm
Okay.
sorry about what happened, type of thing.
So like an automatic writing.
Yeah, it was weird. It was just it's never happened since. But
Okay.
and then she signed it, and then I felt the ghost, the spirit. It was like a spirit leave and go back into the poster. And
Okay.
when it was over with, I went to the phone and called a friend of mine, and told her what happened, and she says she told me, spirits sometimes can't move on in the spirit world until they resolve things back with people on earth, and that's what just happened.
Right.
And so I became a believer in spirits.
Right. Exactly. And sometimes, believe it or not, it's not their resolution, it's yours. It's like, in other words,
it, it,
it's like,
it turned
you're
into my psychic.
right, exactly. Let me soothe your heart. Let's get this resolved because of the circumstances.
Yeah, it,
Exactly.
it
Exactly.
certainly felt like um, you know it felt like a paranormal experience.
That sure sounds like it. I'll tell you that much. It sure
Mhm.
does. Again, Bonnie, it has been wonderful to speak to you, and I want to wish you the best of luck in
Oh,
your
thank you.
projects. And I will be putting a link to your website on the credits of the show. But for my podcast listeners, how can they find out more about you and your books and where they can find it?
Well, they can find it on Amazon.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's on Amazon.
Okay.
Um, I tell people to put in Buried Bones Bonnie Moore because there are a couple of other books with the same name,
With
and
the
there's
name.
a couple of other authors named Bonnie Moore.
So in other words, to put the whole thing so that they can find it on Amazon. Okay, perfect. I understand what you mean. Okay.
So it just makes it easier.
Yes.
But and actually, I mean, it's in Barnes and Noble. It's listed at a whole bunch of different places.
Okay. Okay.
And but Amazon is the easiest.
Oh, of course, yeah, that's where everybody ends up. You know what? I hate to say it because I do it for other products, but this is where people go and look at the and what people say about whether it's an ice maker or a book, what's the feedback that people leave about a book?
Yeah,
That I think that's what the attraction is about Amazon, that people like to read reviews. So the again, perfect.
I've got a couple of good reviews on there. And, it just came out last month, so we're
This
still.
is the thing, yeah, it just launched, and I hate to say it, it's that there's people. Let me ask you, do you think eventually you'll put it like on Audible?
Could do. I mean, Audible is becoming much more popular, isn't it?
I think that I've always been a reader. The reason why I say this is I've always been a reader.
Hmm.
God, since I learned how to read, I've been reading.
Hmm.
But it's just this thing of that we unfortunately we're multitasking.
Hmm.
So, people, the listening part, you can consume it, you know, listen to it that way instead of if I can't be actually, reading it per se, I could
Hmm.
still indulge and listen to the story.
Yeah, it's. I have a friend who's been using Audible books for years, and she keeps telling me it's so great.
Yes, yes, it
But
is.
I'm like you. I read. I do Kindle now. I've got like 600 books on my Kindle.
Wow. Okay. That's another thing. When I'm seeing behind you all those books you got. I had to leave so many of my books behind.
But I left most of my books in Maryland. I had a lifetime supply of books, lifetime collection. I had an amazing collection, and I I've narrowed it down to three bookcases here. I could only bring certain books.
Okay.
Now everything I buy is on Kindle.
I know. It's easier that way. It's more accessible. It's not taking up the space. But
Exactly.
yeah, but that I remember this was I haven't done it because it's not I would fill up, once a year the library in Miami-Dade County, they would basically, the library can only hold X amount of books.
Hmm.
So they would have this huge sale once a year of all the books
Hmm.
that they would bring to the main library and sell them out there.
Hmm.
And some of them were falling apart because they've been taken out a million times, but you could find some great books out there for like penny nothing. They were basically like, take them, 10 cents, take them.
Hmm.
So I got a lot of good books, but that takes up a lot of space. So yeah.
It does. It does.
So
That's why I love Kindle.
yes, exactly. Again, thank you so much and take care, Bonnie.
And I hope you enjoy reading Buried Bones.
Yes, it's wonderful. Yes, I have, look, wait,
Show it.
wait.
Do you have it? There it is.
I
There
have it
you
right
go.
here. I have it right here. See? Yep.
Uh-huh.
I'm trying to, yep, there it is. I have it right here.
Good.
Again, thank you so much, Bonnie. Take care.
It's been a pleasure. Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Mhm.
Wow. Let me tell you, it's very interesting because I mean, we're talking about, I wasn't kidding, when which is why I wanted to ask her, sometimes, even though a book is fictionalized, you draw from your own personal experiences and, or in this case, or what's happening, which is why I brought up the thing. I see, I haven't, like the book, like I haven't gotten far enough into it to find out what she said about the DNA. Because that's one of my things, there's, I like true crime because I think it's, all these cases, that's what I'm saying, especially with the DNA, that now they're discovering, first of all, the identity of victims, and then from there, sometimes they're able to find out um, who the perpetrator was. In some cases, I will tell you that if it's a really old case, sometimes they've even lost, like, they would box these evidence of whatever material, like whatever was at the scene. In some cases, these boxes have been lost or destroyed, or sometimes not. I want to say, especially some of these old cases, whoever was guilty, um, they're dead. They're dead. A lot of times, even the family members, parents of, let's say, if it was a younger person that died, the majority, sometimes they have siblings that are still alive, but the majority of their family have passed away. We're talking really the old um, cold cases. And in some, I want to say, not all the time, but sometimes when they find remains that they've never been able to identify, and the family never really knows. I mean, especially when as years go by, they kind of know or believe that this person died, but they've never really had conclusive answers as to this is what happened. They just didn't move to the other side of the country and forgot about you. That they're given a definite answer. This person was here and this is what, we found them, and maybe we even can tell you this is what happened to them as who did it, or, there's a lot of, sometimes, how's this? Some of these victims, you see that they're in a risky lifestyle. Unfortunately, they run in with people. They're involved in drugs or crime, or the people they hang out with. It's like, you know. And then there's other people that just they're normal. When I say normal, how's this? They're living non-risky lifestyles, and then they just get plucked away. They disappear, and the family never knows what happened to them. And it's because something like that happened. Case in point, like in her story, no body, no crime, no victim, no crime. All right. If there's no proof that this person was actually killed, as far as the police, sometimes there is no crime. And they'll tell you, well, this person could have just decided that they wanted just not to have nothing to do with their family, and they went somewhere, and there's nothing that you can do to prevent that. And if there's we have no proof that, especially, let's say, like, if they go to the place where this person lived and there's blood splattered on the wall, okay, something happened here, obviously there's some foul play. But if there's nothing like that, there was, I want to say, this was maybe 3, 4, 5 years maybe, with Gacy. As you know, Gacy, he, under his house, they discovered all these bodies of all these young men that he had basically raped and killed, strangled. He was horrific. So they there was a bunch of them, believe it or not, that they had never been able to identify them. Some they had, others they hadn't. And I think one of the most recent ones that the ID, of course, again with DNA, was this guy, because there's, everybody um, that I want to say, was originally, I think it was Long Island, something like that, Northeast somewhere. I want to say it was Long Island or Rhode Island, it was one of those. Anyway, he was one of these guys that he was this young guy, and he just told his family, "Look, I want to do my own thing, and I don't want to stick around with you guys. See you, bye." There was no, from what I understand, from what I read, it wasn't like the dysfunctional family, like, "Hey, I need to get away from you guys." No, no, no. For some reason, this guy just didn't want to be with his family. He wanted to live life on his own, and see ya. I'm moving. I'm doing my own thing, and don't worry about me. And see you when I see you, if you ever see me. That kind of deal. So when he dropped off the face of the earth, that he got killed by Gacy, his family's thinking, did something happen to him? But he was like one of these that as a matter of fact, he had gotten married and divorced, but still was a young guy. And he just, well, turns out that where he was under Gacy's house. All right. I think he was like 22 or 23 years old. And finally, the family got an answer like, hey, your young guy of your family, he didn't move off to California and, you know, flip you guys off. He was killed. But my point being is that there's a lot of times people that either by lifestyle or by choice, they move away from their family of origin. And the family of origin is really never really has a, like, they thinking this person gonna be alive and just doesn't want to be with us or want to let us know or drop us a note like, hey, I'm out in so and so. And then other times, you know, how's this? It's like it's the worst case scenario when you fall, let's say, into the hands of like a Gacy type character because there's nobody out there looking for you. You see what I'm saying? It's not that you say, you know what, this guy, he was kind of crazy, but every once in a while he would drop us a line and say, hey, I'm out here, I'm there, I'm okay, don't worry about me, all right? And then another couple of months would pass by and he'd send a note, a letter, a postcard, whatever. Hey, I'm okay, don't worry about me. So that when that person doesn't, then you say, okay, something happened here, all right? And, but when you have a person that says, I'm out of here, bye, so you really have no idea, did something happen to him? Or did he just really make good on what he was always telling us he wanted to do? Another case like this is back in the 70s, 70s in Broward County. This is in the county north of Miami. They find this lady in a trunk. This is like in the a back of a like a bar. They found one of these old steamer trunks, and they find this lady. She's in a negligee with rollers, and she's dead. They crammed her in there, and she's bashed, and they couldn't identify her. They found her like she was within 48 hours, so they had a really good idea what she looked like, you know. And they said, okay, she's had children. She was really tall. She was like 5'10". They put out a sketch because back then, they had the sketches. Nothing. Couldn't find her. Nada. Zero. And finally, they was it 3 years ago, 4 years ago, something like that. They had exhumed her because a lot of these people they would end up burying them, and then I think she was exhumed twice to take DNA material, hopefully to find her, find something, whatever. Now, come to find out, what happened is this lady, they finally got a name for her. She had, I want to say originally she had lived in Arizona. It was Arizona. She had been married twice. She had kids from her first marriage. She has kids from a second marriage. And she meets a guy, I think it was her third marriage, and they decide we're going to move up to Chicago or Detroit. She had, I think, a sister living up there. Okay. Now she has a little girl with her last husband. Okay. And the kids, her first kids, they're already like teenagers. They're like 17, 18. Her middle kids from the second husband, they stay there with her dad. So she leaves with her two older kids from her first marriage and the little girl that she has with her current husband. This daughter, which was 17, is even married. She's like 17, marries a 19-year-old. They move up to Detroit again or Chicago. I can't remember where. The son at some point says, I'm going back home to dad in Arizona or wherever. Psh, he's gone. Somewhere along the way, everybody loses touch with everybody. They lose touch with her daughter, the husband, everybody. They can't find it. And it's like that's the part I don't always get. All of a sudden, I mean, I know that there's, a country, several states between them, but still. Now, when they identify her, it turns out it was in the 70s because I remember something about the Vietnam War going on. So this happened in the 70s, 60s, 70s kind of deal. Her husband, by the time they get the DNA and they figure out who this is, her last husband, he's dead. He had moved to Las Vegas, declared bankruptcy. None of his paperwork or where he lived is there a mention of a wife, an ex-wife, or a daughter. Nowhere. He never, like in other words, nobody ever knows that they divorced or he left or God knows what happened. He left, lives this A few more years out in Las Vegas. Nobody ever knows what happened with that. By the way, he was married when he, bottom line, they found her. They still have, at this point, don't know what happened to her older daughter, who was a teenager, or her younger daughter, which was like maybe 5 or 6. The one guy that I could have supplied answers, which was her last husband, he's dead. So I guess because of all this time that's gone by, like they notified now one of her daughters from older daughters, which is now like this is your mom. This what was it that they called her? The oh my God, was it the trunk lady? I believe is what they had named her. This is your mom, and have you ever heard anything from your two sisters? And she's like, no. So at this point, they have no idea. And there was part of the story was that some witness said, "Oh, we saw two guys in a van pull up and drop off that trunk, and they sped off." Who those two guys were, who knows? She's in a green negligee. They wrapped a towel around her head. She had trauma on her head. That's what killed her. And how she ended up in Florida getting killed and what happened to her two daughters, still a mystery. So again, I guess that's what happens when don't have people checking up on you and going, "What happened to you? Where did you go? Where are you?" At least enough to notify police. Getting back to the original story, which was Bonnie's story about that's, I guess, part of the premise of her book is as long as this lady is buried, under a cabin or somewhere, nobody thinks she's dead. And when she's discovered, and there's a lot of people that basically that's exactly what happens. They're never discovered. That's number one. No victim, no crime. Or number two, even when they are discovered, there whatever is left is so difficult to that they can't even they don't know. Sometimes they don't even know even the sex of the person, depending on what they find. They can't even validate, was this person killed, or how were they killed, or how did they die, or how did they, in other words, there's much less what their identity is. There's a lot of people like that. There's a lot of cases like that, which is, I mean, that even if you say, well, I'm going to pull, and by the way, this was one of the problems they had, was when they found her in Florida, okay, they're putting out this sketch of her in the local Florida area, there, right? But I don't think, from what I understand from my way, she hadn't been there that long. She had only, in other words, if it was anybody that would know what she looked like, it would have been either in her home state in Arizona or Chicago, Detroit, wherever she was at, that could have said, "Hey, that's so and so." But remember, back in the 60s, 70s era, if that sketch ever made the news, it would only have been shown on a local newscast. And of course, everybody's looking at her and, who is that? Oh, well, who knows? So yeah, there's plenty of fodder for good whodunits. So anyway, guys, go to miamighostchronicles.com, go to mppublisher.com, sign up for my Newsstack newsletter. I've got a lot of great guests, a lot of interesting stuff. Again, if you're into weird stuff, go to Erie News, Erie.news, thenightshadediary.com, Supernatural Storytime. And also let me know what you think about that first little piece that I talked about the cattle mutilations. That's got to be one of the most famous things that I want to say are inexplicable about UFOs. Because part of it is there's something going on. And it's again, it's like, I don't know, how's this? It's happened so many people and so many, how can I say it? It's been observed or described or recorded or tested by so many sources that it's like, what's going on? Yeah, that animals get killed, cattle, of course. That they get sick and die, yes, of course that happens. Yes. Or they get struck by lightning, yes, of course that happens. But again, you have too many of these different ranchers, which, by the way, some of these cattle, I mean, they represent a loss, a financial loss to them. that they can't figure it out. Like, what is it about this animal besides the incisions and the mutilations that you have predators that normally would be going and basically dismantling this thing quick. They just give it a wide berth and they don't go, what is it about that they know that this thing can is like what, poisonous? Tell me what you think. Anyway, guys, I hope you like it. Come back. I have a lot of great shows lined up, especially for season 18 of Stories of the Supernatural. And thanks again for spending this time with me. You are all wonderful. Take care.